In today's video, I'll be remaking this edit I made over a year ago for diffuse. Now, originally this was a Mograph Monday video, but some of the files got messed up, so I had to re-record most things. But the same principles still apply. If you go down to the description and you join the Discord, you'll be able to find a download link for the assets that I talk about in this video. Now, this video is for beginners that are somewhat competent and understand a bit of Fusion and are looking to get more into Mographs. I'll be going over composition, setting out your Fusion nodes, animating, as well as talking about 3D and the 3D space, lighting, as well as retiming, as well as making shakes. So grab the assets down below and follow along. So once you've unzipped the file, you should be left with this. I'm going to go ahead and drag in main, and before I play, I'm just going to disable the track here, and all this is the actual edit we can use for reference when we're going ahead and editing. First thing I can tell is our timeline resolution is not the same as the edit resolution. I'm going to go over into settings and then change this to 1440, and then we're just going to go ahead and save that. So then that makes our timeline resolution match the edit. I'm going to go into my effects and bring in a Fusion composition. I already have adjustment clip and Fusion clip favorited, but they will be in this panel here. Okay, so just disabling the track here, I'm going to wind to where it stops or it freezes. So right around here, and then I'm just going to delete the access. So then when we go ahead and hit the arrow keys and play each frame, we can tell that here is where it stops. All right, so enabling the clip here, I'm going to go into my Fusion comp. So opening the file back up, we're going to go into Roto this time, and we're going to drag in M1 and Gwen's hand. And all that is just the rotoed out of the assets that we're going to need for this part of the edit. Okay, so I'm just going to lay the foundations of my node tree here by piping this in to a background. Now, if you're unfamiliar of why I do this in a lot of my edits, is because it's just setting the resolution here. For example, if I just go ahead and add these things here like so, and say I'm actually not happy with this and I want to remove it, we can go ahead and remove it without completely destroying the tree here. If I just show you, say I wanted to use this as the base to build off, and I went ahead and added a bunch more things, and like before, I say actually I don't think I want this clip here, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove it. You can see then there that now the node tree has nothing to build upon, as nothing is piped into our first background merge. So that is why I go ahead and put those backgrounds just to set the resolution. Okay, so we want our background to be clear so we can have a nice clean workspace. So I'm going to go ahead and bring down the alpha, and I'll explain why I do that at the end of building this comp. So we're going to go ahead and make the speed lines from this part of the edit. And to do that, we're going to bring in a fast noise, and I'm going to pipe this into the first viewer. Okay, so first we're going to bring our contrast to 3.1. We're going to go into scale and just uncheck the Y and X lock, and we're going to go to the Y scale and make this 90, and then in the X scale we're going to make it 0.31, and then now we can go ahead and bring our brightness down to minus 2.71. Now there are barely any lines on the screen, but you can see them very faintly. I don't like that there's not a lot, so we're going to go ahead into the detail now and increase that to somewhere around 4, something like that will do. Okay, to make these lines pop a bit more, we're going to hit shift space and type in Mac control, and I'm going to go ahead and just pipe this into a background so you can see it better. It's going to hit a contract and expand all the way up to 1. I'm going to go ahead now and bring the threshold really close together so the lines are nice and thick like so. Somewhere around here will do. And we're also going to bring this up ever so slightly as well. Okay, so now that we have that and we hit play, we can see that the lines are not moving. So we're going to go ahead and fix that. Now there are two ways of doing this. You go ahead and increase the sheath rate, so then when you play it, the lines are moving like this. Or you could go ahead and go into the center and just keyframe the movement. So going over to the first keyframe, placing one there, and then placing one here, and then just moving the X scale like so. And I think that gives a much better result. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as that. Okay, so adding that into timeline, I'm going to go ahead now and then change this to white. And then going up into our node tree here, I'm going to go ahead and bring in a text node as well as a transform. And I'm just going to write the letter U in caps a bunch of times. I think that will do. Add this into my node tree and just view our media. So your first thought might be to click on the transform and drag this all the way up to somewhere around, I don't know, 6, just like in the original. But we can quickly tell that the edges are really blurred and the resolution just doesn't look good at all. So instead of doing that, we're going to bring this back to its normal size and increase it in the actual text node. And we can see that the lines already a much cleaner. And then we're going to use this as like a null object and animate the movement like so. So changing the size to 1.229 and then changing the color to this hex code, which will be provided in the description. We now have the foundation for our movement here. And this is way too many views. So I'm just going to go ahead and decrease the size of that. So it's just a little bit, so it's a little bit manageable, and that should be okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and make the next asset. Okay, quickly before I forget as well, I'm going to go ahead and change the font to Cool Vertica. So I'm going to copy by Control C and pasting by Control V. I'm going to bring down the size to something much smaller, like so. And then I'm just going to go ahead and change the colors. I'll also have the hex code of this down in the description, or you could just go ahead and copy it from the screen. Changing the words, I'm going to do the same thing and add a transform and then just pipe that into our comp here and then place that somewhere around here. To be specific, it is this value here. Drag this to the other side of the screen and then moving up again, put this up really high this time. I'm going to copy again and then paste. This time we're going to go ahead and change the letters here and then adding a transform, piping this in so we can actually see. And I'm going to just make this a little higher because we will put something in between this after. Adding that in and change the size as well. And then adding in a transform. And I'm just going to place that somewhere around here. Okay, so going back up, we're going to go over and select Miles here and bring this down and add this into our comp. First, I'm going to just increase the size ever so slightly. Something around there will do. And then just move him up until he's in the corner of the screen, just going a little bit over the edge. I went ahead and increased the size just a tiny bit. Somewhere around here will do. Okay, so in order to make it match the original with the colors, I'm going to go ahead and add a brightness contrast. And first thing I'm going to do is bring the saturation all the way down. I'm also going to bring the brightness down just a tad. I'm going to bring our contrast up to 0.29. And as you can tell, that's affecting all of our comp. So I'm just going to go ahead and select all of these here. And then now that's only targeting our subject. I'm going to bring the gamma up just a tiny bit and decrease the brightness a tiny bit as well. So then now that's looking a lot closer to our original. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and add the hand to the comp as well. And I'm just going to view the media out. So like before, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this in. And for her, I'm going to bring the brightness down just a tiny bit as well. And with the transform, position her where she needs to be. So first, I'm going to change the pivot point to the end of her arm and increase the size. The reason why I put the pivot point there is because that's where the growth will start from. If I go ahead and reset and just increase, we can see that it just grows outwards instead of where we actually want it to be. So moving the pivot point back and increasing the size just a tiny bit. I'm gonna go ahead and rotate the angle here and bring this down. And then we're gonna go ahead and flip and rotate the angle a little bit more. So when we play, we get this. And then now I'm actually gonna go ahead and move this above the clip. And we don't need this merge here, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So going back to the bottom and copying and pasting this above, because we want it to be layered as well, we're going to have the speed lines in the back and in the front. But because it's an exact copy, the orientations of the lines are going to be the same. So in order to change that, we go over into sheath and just change the values till you're happy with something. And I think that looks all right. And we can see that some of the speed lines appear behind and some of them appear in front. Okay, so now we have everything built out. And go ahead and animate. Now I'm going to go back and put this alpha all the way back up and change it to this hex value here. All right, so now we can go and start animating the letters. And all it is just a linear movement. Now, linear movement just means without any accelerations or slowing down, it's just a continuous movement. So going to the beginning here, I'm just going to view this here. I'm going to place a keyframe here and then going to the end, place a keyframe and just move this along like so. And then going to the next one and doing the same. So then once we go ahead and press play, we're left with something like this. And you can go ahead and go back and forth and play around with the speed and how much you would want things to move. But yeah, that's pretty much it. There's one more thing I'll go ahead and add, and it is the blur that appears at the bottom of the screen. So hitting shift space, we're going to type in vary blur and add that into our comp like so. I'm going to change this to defocus. I'm going to bring this up to 6. And then I'm just going to go ahead and increase the blur size to somewhere around here will do. So as you can tell, this blur on its own, it's actually not that good. And the reason it's like that is because we need a matte to control the blur. And we'll do that using a background. So piping this background in like so, it immediately just removes the blur. Now this is because it is basing the blur off the matte values. And all black means no blur at all. So in order to activate the blur, We're going to go over into a solid color here and change that into gradient. And as you can tell, it's immediately added the glow to the very white parts of the image. And as you can tell, there's a nice gradient going between the bottom here to the top. Now, as you can tell, zooming all the way in here, we can tell that it also removes the edges of the image. Going back, I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it and then change this back to black like we did originally, and then bring down the alpha. We're going to disconnect here and then merge this on top and then add this into our media out. And then that goes and removes it. Now, the reason we go ahead and we're doing that is because then we take all of what we've done just here and we've merged it on top of this. So on its own, there's no background, and we're putting it above our variable is so that it doesn't affect it from the bottom. Where we have the no tree set up here is that everything kind of built up, and you can tell with the indications of the arrows here. So if I just go ahead and merge this below like so, and then going ahead and connecting this in, we can see that then we're met with the same problem. I hope that makes sense. Let me know in the comments if you want me to explain it. So one last step now, and if we go ahead and play the edit, we can see that in the background there, our scene that we just made is frozen. It's not moving. So the way I usually go ahead and freeze clips is I'll go ahead and duplicate it by dragging Alt and just moving, right clicking, going ahead and compound clipping. I have my compound clip binded to C. And then on the very last frame here, I'll right click, going over into change speed clip and then hitting freeze frame and then deleting this excess here. And then when we zoom in, we're able to drag out the clip here and it is a nice freeze frame. So just moving this over and disabling this clip here so we can see where our next scene ends. So here, and then I'm just going to go ahead and enable our clip. So we are left with this here. All right, there's one last thing we need to add to say that this part is done. And if we go to the beginning of our clip, you can see the pink here that appears for 2 frames. And the way I usually do these is going over into generators and just choosing a solid color. And this is basically just a background node. And then going ahead and just choosing pink here. So now I'm selecting an adjustment clip and bringing that above, just cutting that and opening it in Fusion. I have mine set to F. I'm going to add a flicker addition and then add that into our node tree and leave the settings as so. So now we're going to animate the line that appears, bringing in a background, piping that in, then bringing in a rectangle, changing this over into white, scaling this up like so, and then angling it. I'm going to place a keyframe here on the height, and then going over into frame 4 and placing another keyframe there. We're going to bring the value in the keyframe 4 all the way down so it's not visible. And then in the last keyframe, I'm going to bring that down slightly to somewhere around here. Pulling this up in the spline, hitting Control A to select the points, and then making this an ease out. And I'm going to make this quite sharp as well. So then when we play, we get this. Okay, so in order to add the interesting edges, I'm going to use a fast noise to control the edges of the line. I'm going to hit Shift Space and type in displace and then add that in, disconnecting this and right clicking and dragging and letting go. We're going to put this into the input and then connecting this over. And then now we can go ahead and pipe this into the map, then increasing the refraction strength like so. So now we can see it's basing the displacement of the lows and the high values of the fast noise. And then when we go ahead and change detail, you can see that also interacts with that as well. Okay, so resetting our settings for the fast noise, we can go ahead and change it to the settings I went ahead and used. So my detail was 5.28. My contrast was 1.57. My brightness was at 1. My sheath rate is at 0.189. And then my scale was 2.99. And then now I'm going back into the displacement. I'm just going to bring this down to somewhere around here. So then now we are left with this animation, and we can go ahead and copy this fast noise and displacement and bring it into our next adjustment. So bringing in an adjustment clip, cutting this, and then going in, we can go ahead and paste this down, bringing in the animation we just made and unchecking the first keyframe and as well as the last one. Piping this in like so, going back into the edit page so we can see the bottom for reference and disable the compound clip. And then going back in, we can go ahead and use the animation for reference. One last thing is I'm going to go over into playback, going over into render cache and changing that into smart. So then now once this red line cues over into blue, our playback will be nice and smooth. And if you don't already have these blue lines, just go ahead and right click into your clip and then render cache fusion output, just put that over into on. So having this here and decreasing the contrast ever so slightly, going into the color settings and just dragging that till it matches that color. And then with the graph, I'm going to change it accordingly. So I'm going to go ahead and play the whole thing. We are left with this. I'm also actually going to make this graph way tighter. And then going over back into our file, we're going to bring in the Miles roto like so. And then going back up, we're going to go over into the PNGs and bring this PNG over. Going back into the edit page here, I'm going to go ahead here and click this display tracks and make a second timeline. And this timeline is going to solely be for making the effects. If I go back into the file and then go ahead and go back into roto and grab the one named Miles roto, clicking Alt and selecting audio clip and deleting that. And we want to go ahead and scan to where he starts talking. So somewhere around here, and go ahead and cut that clip and just ripple delete. We don't need that. I'm going to bring this up a track because we're going to copy it and over into our first timeline, and then just go ahead and matching it up and cutting the excess. And I've just realized that this whole section is 1 frame short. So we'll just go ahead and pull that up by a frame. So then now once we are happy, we'll go ahead and copy this, bring this back into our first, deleting this and just pasting this over. Now, when we go back into the original timeline and just deselect all of this, if I just go frame by frame and play this, you can see that the color of our actual subject here is changing along with these lines that split. We can go over to where we can see that this cut here is happening. Just disable this track here, making a cut there, and we can see when we go back that it appears or it disappears in the next frame. So we're going to go back and make a cut there, and then going forward we're going to make another cut now, and I'm going to bring this back into timeline here, and I could very well just go ahead and make this effect here like so, but for me it's good practice to have 2 separate timelines. One is your main and then the other is you can go ahead and mess around with effects and stuff. If you already know what effect you're going to make, go ahead and stick to your main timeline, but I just use this as good practice. So going over into this, we're going to open it in Fusion and then just drag in a background and pipe this into the background and change this over into white. And then we're going to do the same for this next clip here. But first, we're going to go ahead and fix the color so it's similar to our original clip. We're going to do that by right clicking and typing in hue curves and adding that into our clip. We're going to go over into the yellow and just bring that all the way down, and then going over into the blue and bringing that down as well. So then when we bring a background in and pipe this into the background and just view the background in our first image, of course, changing it to white. When we go ahead and put this over our clip, we can bring in a polygon node now and mask the merge node like so, and then change this over into invert. And then we're going to go ahead and copy the hue curves and paste it into our next. So when we go ahead and play, we get this nice animation here, and then we can go ahead and compound clip that. You can name it what you want. I'm just going to go ahead and hit create and go back into our main timeline. We can disable this, or in fact, we can just delete that. Enabling these tracks, going into our Fusion and then typing in the name. I just named it compound 2. I just kept it as compound 2 and dragging this in. So then when we go ahead and play, we can see our nice animation there. And to prep this ready for animation, I just went in and added a transform. And now that I'm here, I'm just going to go ahead and set up my node tree so it is vertical, as it's just a preference, as it helps me and hopefully will help you visualize it as layers. So just reiterating, this will be our first layer here, the merge 1, and then the merge 2 will be our second layer. Going ahead back into our file and just going up here, going over into the PNGs and dragging this one over and view this into our first viewer. Prepping this ready to add into our comp, I'm going to add in another background and drag this pointer in to match the color of the white here. And then viewing that merge and adding in a polygon and piping that in, we're going to mask around the words so those disappear. Now I'm going to use the same technique with the displacement here to get the effect of it kind of growing from the animation. And I'm going to do that with Vision's displacement, as that's what I did in the original. It's a free displacement and I'll leave the link to downloading it in the description. Bringing in a transform and piping that in. The only thing we are going to change is the angle. And in the displacement, we're going to just animate the size. And as you can see here, the edges are mirrored. Let's go ahead and change that over into canvas. Bring in a text, merging that on top, and then just typing in an exclamation mark and changing it to this font, as well as if we zoom in and select this color of brown or gray, I should say. And then now we're going to increase the size. We're going to go ahead and extend this and add in transform as well as a camera shake, and then just going ahead and adding that in. And if we just go ahead and view this, we can see that the camera shake is quite violent. We want it to look like the original. Just to see this better, I'm going to make another version and just play around and change the color so you can go ahead and see it. Basically, what the versions do is, just in the name, it allows you to make different versions. So let's say I go ahead and change the size of this one, and let's say actually I don't like this, into the original, and then it has all of the other settings. So changing the X and the Y rotation like so, going into the rotation division and changing that into 0.488, the randomness 0.638, and then we'll bring the overall strength down to somewhere around here, as well as the speed. That looks decent to me. Going over into the frequency method and just changing that over into this, and that should tie everything together. So now we can go back into our first version and just go ahead and change that over like so. And of course, if you're not happy with these settings and you want to make this a little bit more violent, then you can go ahead and do so. But now we have everything prepped and ready for animation. One last thing we can do is going ahead and changing the pivot point to the bottom here, and then just increasing the size like so. And then now that we have everything ready and prepped for animation, I'm going to go ahead now and first add in a transform, and then selecting all of this in Control G to group everything together, dragging this above and adding this over and piping that in. Okay, going over into the group that we made, I'm going to set the displace over into 1 and then change the size like so. Then I'm going to open my spline ready, placing a keyframe on the size and going over into, I want to say 13, putting that down to 0, and then placing the displacement down, and we're going to animate it like so. Clicking this down, say I'm not happy with where it is at 13, going over into this setting here, we can go ahead and drag out our keyframes whilst keeping the same bend on the graph, and I think that looks a lot better. Whilst we're here now, I'm actually now going to go ahead and increase the size of our exclamation mark a lot more. And whilst we're here as well, I will also animate the size of it, matching it up with the keyframes we made earlier. Increase the size in Control A to select all of them, and then having the graph somewhere like that. It doesn't have to be all the way perfect. And then closing our group, going into the transform of it, and then going over into the center, placing a keyframe. I also did go ahead and change the graph of the displacement, and with everything, we are left with this. So going back into the edit page here and just deselecting this, we can see that there are a bunch of these action lines incorporated into this, like in the last one. So I'm going to go back into our Fusion comp and just go ahead and copy this and pasting it on top here like so. In the fast noise, I'm going to remove the keyframes and going into this end frame here, change the angle going into our rectangle here, copy that and paste it into the angle of the fast noise. And then as you can see here, it appears outside of the image. We don't want that. So we're going to drag this input here and pipe it into the mask layer of this layer like so. So then that goes ahead and deletes anything on the outside. And when we play the image here, when I go into fast noise and increase the sheath rate quite a bit, you can see that it only appears inside of that image here. And we can actually make this quite a lot faster. And then going into the background here and selecting the color, and we're going to make this a little bit darker, something like that will do. And we're going to go and change the fast noise settings by decreasing the Y scale, but also increasing the brightness. Then I'm going to copy this and paste it on top of this layer here, changing the orientation by changing the sheath, and then going into the color here and dragging this down till it's like a light red, almost kind of pink-ish. And there we go. And then one last step is I'll select the merge and bring down the brightness. And we're left with this. Going into the next scene, bringing in a Fusion clip, and I'm just going to deselect this, undisabling the clip and going into the Fusion page. Now this scene does require some basic level of 3D, But don't worry, I already made a video covering all the basics of that. But you should be able to follow along because we're not going to be doing anything complicated. So opening up our file again, I'm just going to bring in this PNG and then view this on the first viewer. Bringing in a B-spline here. I'm just going to go ahead and mask around his head. Now, I would prefer using the B-spline over the polygon because it is just quicker to use. And I like the fact that the lines are auto-curved. You don't have to go ahead and edit them. And with a little bit of practice, it doesn't take too long to get used to at all. Going ahead and quickly just masking over this and then connecting them up like so and piping this in. So then we get the cutout of his head here. Going in and copying the media, Control C and Control V to paste. And then paste this one that we have on top. Then going into the one underneath, we'll bring in a rectangle node and then go ahead and select just the top of his head where we masked out and then click invert. So then we get this. And to make this closer to the original, I'm just going to pull this up like so. So going ahead now and making the stars that appear in our scene. We're going to shift space and type in S star and then hitting shift space again and typing in S render and then adding that in. Just going to pipe this into a background so we can see. When we're into the star and changing these to 5 points and then just rotating it up like so. And then in order to increase it without making the resolution bad, we're going to select this and hit enter inside and that pulls up this expression here. We can go ahead and drag this over into the width. So basically all this means is that if I go ahead and increase the value of the width here, the height also increases at the same value. It's just easier than copying and pasting every time we change the values around. We're going to go ahead and select and copy and then duplicate and paste them out 2 more times. I went ahead and changed the colors. I just show you the hex code for this one as well as this one here and then this one as well. So now that we have our assets built out, we can go ahead and convert these now into 3D layers. So I'm going to add in an image plane for all of them and piping these into the image plane, connecting this into the image plane, bringing out a renderer and a camera, and then piping this in like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and merge these together and then bring this merge into the other merge. And I'm going to hold Alt and click the line to make a pipe router. This just makes things look better, in my opinion, rather than it just being like that. And then we're going to view our 3D scene. Quickly, to navigate, it's Alt and holding your middle mouse wheel to look around, to rotate like this. Scrolling will just scroll up and down. Control scrolling will zoom in and out. And clicking the mouse wheel will allow you to navigate like so. Okay, so I went ahead and I moved our main subject back. And I'm going to do the same with the stars here. But I'm going to go ahead into the scale and increase the value till it's quite big. And then also referencing our original image, I will then do the same for the rest of the stars and pull this into where I want them to be, as well as going over into the star and rotating them around as seen. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and do the same with Tyler over here. And before I do that, actually, I'm going to reset his position and I'm going to add in a transform and select the 3D transform and then use these axes then to move them backwards. And then I'll use the controls just to make him smaller like so. And I explained why I have it set up like this in the video I mentioned earlier. So going back into our image plane, I'm going to go into the pivot scale here and change it down so it's in the middle. As you can see, the pivot point is changing there. And then we're going to use the image plane to change the rotation here. And I'm going to have the end rotation actually be somewhere like this. So it's going to end on keyframe 9. So I place a keyframe there, then go into the beginning and place another keyframe and rotate that like so. And then going into our spline, I'm going to have it ease. Something like that will do. And I'll actually make this a little think I'm happy with that. All right, so then we could go ahead and animate the camera. Going into the camera settings, going over into transform, and then placing a keyframe on the X axis at the beginning of our clip, and then placing one at the end, and just zooming in like so. And I'll have this zoomed out a bit as well. So then going in and doing the same graph, but this time, instead of having it all the way flat, we're going to angle it slightly so it has like a continuous movement and doesn't necessarily slow down as much as we would have it if it was like this. So then when we go ahead and play, we get something that looks like this. As before, we will go ahead and set the resolution or have it merged up on top of a background, and then we'll change the background to white and go ahead and decrease the value ever so slightly like so. So looking back now, there is sort of a black border on our main subject, which we don't want. And I will show you how you can go ahead and fix that. So selecting the merge here, I'll bring in another rectangle and I'll place this here and set this to subtract. So it takes away from the original image. So first we have things cut off like this, and then we just go ahead and subtract it like so, and then go ahead over into the very corner and bring that down until the black disappears by going in now and bringing in an adjustment clip, just dragging that over and cutting it out. And this is why we're going to build all the effects inside of this adjustment layer. First thing we're going to do is make a vignette. Now this is how I make all of my vignettes, which I basically just get a background like so, and then pipe in an ellipse, pull that all the way to the edge, invert, pull the levels down, and then go ahead and soft edge, and then we get that nice quick vignette like so, which already makes it look a little bit better. It's pretty simple as well. Let me show you. Grabbing in another background and just piping this in. I'm going to view this, bring in an ellipse, just size that like so, then deselect the solid and bring up the border width. Dragging this ellipse up here, adding a rectangle and just adding that in. And then I'm going to bring this down, bring the width up and angle it like so. Then I'm going to go ahead and copy this and then create an instance of it by hitting Ctrl+Shift+V and then pasting this in here. And basically all an instance is, it's just a duplicate, but it's an active duplicate. So if you change something in one, it changes in the other as well. So in this instance, I'm going to go ahead now and right click the angle and de-instance it right here. So then now everything, all of these settings are the same except from the angle. And then I'm just going to take away that minus here that brings it to the other side. And then as well as that, I'm going to bring down the height so it kind of matches the width of this here. And then when we go into the merge, I will bring that down and then we get this. Okay, so with the please stand by text here, it's pretty simple. Just go ahead and delete this and show you. Bringing in a text node and going ahead and typing out please stand by. I'm going to go ahead and change the font and then going over into the shading tab and going over into the fourth section and just hit enable. And this brings up this. We don't want the color to be like this, so we go ahead and make this black. Click OK, extend the horizontal to, I'm just going to put 3, and then increase the vertical as well. So then when we go ahead now and we say that we just like delete a couple letters, it auto adjusts to that as well. The only thing I did then was adjust the position. Already, it's starting to look very close to the original. All right, to go ahead and make these things that appear, it's pretty simple, and I'll just show you that now. So go ahead here and bring in a background and just view this background. Bringing in a rectangle and piping that in, copying the background and pasting that in as well. I'm going to merge this background on top like so, and then change this background color to white. Viewing the background, piping this in, selecting our screen here and hitting Ctrl+G, which brings up the grid. We'll bring up another rectangle and pipe this in and then set this to subtract. So then when we head and move it over like so, it takes away and we can make that as close as we want to the guideline like so. Bringing in a merge here and just connecting this over to the merge and then viewing this merge, I'll bring in a transform, pipe this into the transform, and then go ahead and flip that like so, and then pipe this in, viewing the merge, and then bringing in another rectangle and then piping that in, and then going ahead and using the guide like we did earlier, we get our nice checkered line like so. So then we can go ahead now and bring in a transform, group these together by hitting Ctrl G, and then we can just delete the merge because we don't need this anymore. So then adding this into our node tree, selecting the transform, I'm going to bring this down and then have this over into the corner. Then hitting the transform and typing in duplicate and adding that into our comp. I'm going to drag it over to the end like so, and then copying and pasting that duplication and just double clicking the center here, viewing the duplication, of course. I'm going to drag it to the top here. So then when we go ahead and change the size like so, it affects all of the duplicates. I hitting shift space and typing in wavy lines and just putting that in and adding this into our comp. Going over into the settings here, changing the scale to something like here, and then just bringing down the strength ever so slightly. Then I went and added in a rectangle mask and then moved that over, hitting shift space and typing in grain. And all I did was just increase the grain size by a bit, as well as decreasing the power ever so slightly and increasing the red difference. It doesn't make a big difference, but when you zoom in, you can tell a little bit. Then I went ahead and added a brightness and contrast, and then just turned the saturation down ever so slightly, adding in a camera shake here to giving it that old monitor feel. As you can see, like before, the shake is quite violent and we do not need that at all. Bring down the X division all the way and then change this to 1. Bring down the rotation all the way as well, and then bring down the strength all the way to, but we will increase the speed all the way up to 1. And then when we play, it vibrates up and down, giving it that old monitor feel. And some of the borders do end up showing, so we can go ahead and change it from canvas to mirror, and that fixes our issue. Now you could actually go ahead and increase or decrease the strength as much as you like, but yeah, that is how to get that effect. Okay, so one last thing here is going and adding a transform to the text, setting a keyframe here on frame 4, and going over into center and going over and placing one at the end. We're going to make that go up, and then that will transition into the next scene, and I'll have it set out like so. So making the fusion clip the same size as the one underneath. We will then go ahead and start animating the scene. So before we do that though, because we already made the star here, we're going to go back into the Fusion comp and we're just going to pick one of the renders here and add that into our next scene. Okay, so like I've explained before, we're going to need a camera, a renderer, and the merge. We won't go ahead and add in a image plane because these assets here are 3D text. And with 3D text, you don't need to pipe it into an image planer in order for it to be active in a 3D scene. So go ahead and drag the 3D text, and that's all we need. And then whilst we're here as well, go ahead and drag in a spotlight. Okay, so go ahead and type in the $ over here and then change the font. Then whilst I'm here, I'm going to go and change the color as well. Then going over into extrude, I'm just going to zoom in and turn it on its side so you can see the extrusion and increase the extrusion depth by somewhere around here. And then going over into the lighting here and just turning on the lighting so we get an idea of what the edges look like. I'll increase the bevel depth and increase the bevel width so you can see somewhere around here will do. And now we have our 3D text with bevel. Okay, so now clicking the 3D text, shift space and type in transform, adding that in and then connecting that over into the merge and then camera and then renderer. So like before, set out your scene using the transform for its position and then going over into the native text here for its rotation. And I'm going to change the pivot point so it's in the center. So then when we rotate, it rotates from the center like so. And I'll do the same for this. Okay, so once you're happy with the placement and how everything looks, we can go ahead now and then turn off lighting inside of our scene here in the merge and go back into the 3D renderer and just enable lighting. Now that turns everything black because we don't have any lights in our scene currently. So like before, and we're going to light it with spotlight, and I'm going to hit shift space and type in ambient light and just add that into our scene. Now this edit was a long time ago and the way I lit that scene there is not the same way I will light my scenes usually. So I'm going to show you how to do things better over in this scene. First, I usually use an ambient light. Now what an ambient light does, it just lights everything the same amount of lighting, and I'll increase that by just a tiny bit there. Okay, so then usually I have one spotlight here. As you can see, that's added in, and I go over into transform and I pick choose target. Now, what choose target does when you enable it is that when you maneuver your camera or your light around, it rotates around a subject here. If I just go ahead and unclick that, you can see now that when I move my camera, it doesn't really rotate the same. So going ahead now and enabling that choose target, I usually just pull it back, and going over into controls, I change that to quadratic, and that just has a better light to it. And then now I usually increase this to somewhere around 4 and leave it as that. The next thing I'll do with the spotlight, adding this again, is I'll do the same thing and I will choose target. And moving your target here, you can choose the translation of the target. And I'll usually have this somewhere around here, could do, and I'll actually move my target like so. Now, this doesn't stop with just one light. If you did want, you could in fact use multiple lights, but I think for now, I'm pretty happy with this outcome. Okay, so now that we have our lighting situated, we can go ahead and animate them. Now, the animation is pretty simple in itself. It is quite literally just a linear animation of the camera moving in. So setting translation or setting a key point here at the Z axis and then going over to the end, we will just inch our camera closer. And I think that's good enough. We're going to go ahead now and animate the rotation. So going over into the text here, and again, you can rotate this as much as you like. You can get it close to the source footage, like the edit, or you could just like rotate it in any direction you'd like. And with that as well, it is a linear movement. So going over into here, placing a keyframe on both of these and then going over to the end and just like changing the rotation a bit. You could change it in any way you like. I'm actually gonna switch it up and do something different here as well. Okay, so once you are happy with the movement of everything, we're gonna go over into a render here and just improve our render settings. I usually have mine set to hardware renderer because my system can handle it. Then going over into anti-aliasing and then changing the high Q rate down. And basically all that does is it takes away the resolution just a tiny bit, but enough to not tell. And it just improves the playback. By the way, this is all mentioned in my intro to 3D. I actually mentioned in the beginning of the video. So if you want to learn a bit more about 3D, or I've talked about something that you don't quite understand, go ahead and give that video a watch and it should clarify things for you. Okay, so now grabbing a background merge here with this hex code, I'm just going to merge this on top like so, and then I'll view this in the second viewer. Okay, going back, I did add another spotlight just to highlight this $sign here that appears. If I just take this away, you can see the difference. It just makes it pop a little bit more. Okay, so grabbing in a text node here, I'm just going to type in bread, then going over and changing the font like so, and then increasing the size by there will do, going over into shading and disabling number 1 and then enabling the red outline here and bring down the thickness, and I'll change the color using this hex code here. And then going back into text, I will increase the size by quite a bit. I'll say 2 for now, and I'll even increase that a bit more to 5. Okay, I think that is nice. Going back over into the shading tab and just decreasing the border here. And I'll go ahead and add that into our timeline. Okay, then going back over into text and decreasing the tracking here. And then I'll add a transform, and then this will act as our movement. Okay, so going up above, the setup for this is pretty similar. Get your text and you just place them on top of each other like so. And then I'll have a movement to animate the whole group, and then I'll have one separated just for the word bread here. Okay, and to make this text pop out a little bit and just to make the scene more composited, we'll add a vignette, and doing that, I'll go into a background and then merging that on top, which changes the colors. And then like before, adding an ellipse, going to the edge, flipping that around, moving the soft edge up quite a bit, and then decreasing the level. And I'll just go ahead and shape that. And I think that looks way better. And I'm also going to go ahead and just tweak around a few things. Okay, I think I am happy with that. And just for playback's sake, I will disconnect this and we will focus just on the animation of this. Okay, so breaking this down and looking at it, as I said before, there is a group animation or a group transform that animates everything here. And then that animation is going down and back up. And then the second animation is with the word bread here, going slightly over to the left and then really fast over to the right, which transitions the movement. So we will go ahead and replicate that. So viewing this, I'm going to increase the size a tad, starting from the top here, and then going over to frame 7, bringing that down, and then 11 brings that up. And view this inside. Control A to copy, and then F to flatten out, and then I'll have this like so. Now looking at this now, I think I made a mistake having that so far away. So when we play that, we should get something, a nice bounce here. So then this is the stage, then we can go ahead and tweak things around. I don't like how deep it goes down, so I'll just bring that up. Okay, now we're happy with that. Bringing in a transform, we're gonna grab this over here and then over here and just bring this forward. Now you might be thinking that, hang on a sec, it actually starts off moving from the left first and then goes quickly over into the right. So why are we keyframing it just moving to the right? Well, I'll show you with the graph. Manipulate the graph in a way that it does that. If I go ahead and bring this down all the way like so, you can see here, if I just go frame by frame and show you that it then moves to the left over into the right first. And that is because of this dip here. So when we play it, we get this movement, which then transitions nicely. If I just go ahead and test this here into the next one. Once we go ahead and add the 3D scene, everything is looking nice. And of course, if you don't like the way things look here, you can always tweak things yourself and just play around with things and see if you can learn anything new. For example here, I don't like the way I animated it into where it kind of just stops at the end. And the reason I did it like that, so is I can show you a little trick I often find myself doing. So with movements like this, where everything is linear, we kind of want things to be moving continuously. So zooming in here and using the little tabs to control the graph, that sort of stopping in movement is because of this. And if I just go ahead and angle this slightly, all this does is it tells it to just continuously keep moving. And then when it stops is at the end of the clip. So when we go ahead and we can see the difference that makes, it's a subtle difference, but I think that looks pretty good. Okay. One last thing I did go ahead and tweak is the graph here. Before I had this set up like so, basically meaning that this goes really fast and then really fast again and then slows down. But I moved it along so it has a smaller break and then it moves on. Okay, so one last thing before we can call this side of the animation done is adding another linear movement for the text we made here. And I'll start this like so. And I'd actually want that to move a little bit slower. So I will adjust. I think that will do. Okay, so the way we're going to go about this now is we're going to make this really big scene here. And then we're going to go ahead and go back and add a few more tweaks inside of the edit page and a few in the Fusion as well. Okay, so having your Fusion clip stretched out to where the clip ends, using, of course, this as reference. Instead of actually going into the Fusion clip, we're going to go into our effects building timeline. And we're then going to go into our file. First, we're going to go into the PNG folder and grab in our ID card and then going back in and grabbing in the one that says miles here. And we are going to need this clip like so. And then going over into this media here, the ID card. We'll then go into our media pool and then drag in that clip of miles. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and cut out the card using B-spline. Now, I found myself using B-spline quite a bit. Make sure you are viewing the card when you're cutting it out. Now, the reason I like using B-spline is because it automatically curves the edges here for you, as opposed to polygon node. If I just go ahead and show you, you have to manually put in the curves yourself. So let's say I just go over here and I just play around with the curve. You can see that sometimes it might be a bit time consuming depending on how much curves you have in your image. So using B-spline, I feel just works really good for me. And a quick tip with B-spline is if you want to make these dramatic curves, it's better you do it with these smaller points here. And I'll just show you why you shouldn't go ahead and just kind of curve around like that, because you see here our curve path is not the one we want. So using these smaller curves here, it's better off to curve it like so, and then connecting like so. And then we go ahead and just connect that in. And there we have our nice clean cutout. So then when I view the media out, we are off to a really good start. Okay, so grabbing the rectangle here, I'll just push it over onto the side. And then now we can go ahead and start filling out Miles's details. Okay, now I'm going to add in the native transform and bump up everything like so. And then this portion will be dedicated to just adding in the information. And I'll be doing that with a font called Holiday Free. If I just view this font and type in anything, you can see it is a handwriting font. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that and fill everything out. Okay, so once you have everything written out, I copied and pasted this from the last scene we did and pasted it over and changing the blending mode here, or the apply mode, sorry, to darken. And everything together, we get this. Then now I'm going back into the edit page here. I can go ahead and compound clip this. I can go ahead and compound clip this here. And then going into our edit page, or our main timeline. So now I'm going into this fusion comp and then pulling in that compound clip we made. We're going to then convert this to 3D by just adding an image planer and a renderer. And then whilst I'm here, going back into our files, we will need 2 clips. So the one at school and then him on the bus. And then that should be it. Like always, grabbing in a background, merging that on top and putting down the alpha. We will then connect this renderer in and view this media out. So clicking the image planer, typing in transform and adding that in. So we can pull this closer and then use the image planer rotation for its actual rotation here. And because it clips the edge, I will just bring it back like so. And the animation itself, it's simple, starting off here and then going over into I say frame 18, placing a keyframe and then just putting that like so. And then I'll go over into the transform here and I'll start off at frame 10 and place a keyframe on the Y rotation and then one at 28 over into the side like so. And then just going ahead and keyframing those, and we'll have a curved like so. And then with the transform, Control A, F, and we'll just leave it as that and see how it looks. And I'll maybe extend this and make this smoother. And I am pretty happy with that. So the way I have this set up is I have a camera, or I think I have 2 cameras if I recall from the original comp. And by cameras, I mean transform. And then I'll have our main clip here at the bottom and I'll put a transform onto that as well. Okay, so with this keyframe now, we're going to keyframe it coming in. So keyframing the first keyframe, so keyframe 0, and then going back and using this as a reference. I want to say somewhere around here, we'll go back and we'll place another keyframe and we'll have this moving up into the side. I'll actually increase the size and have this moving from here, and we can go ahead and just tweak them like so. And then now I want to move this down, so I'll add another transform and move that down slightly, and I'll also decrease the size in our original. Okay, so once you're happy and you've gone back and forth, happy with the way things look, I went ahead and changed it slightly so that it isn't going so much from the left here to the right. And I went and changed my graph so it is less aggressive. We can then now go over to compositing the background and making sure that this looks nice. So selecting our clip, we'll add in a color curves and a brightness and contrast, and then adding in a hue curves. Okay, so with the green, we'll put that all the way down and then bring these up like so. Somewhere like that will do. And if I zoom in, that just makes the image pop just a tiny bit. With our color curves here, we're just going to bring this down and then bring up the highlights to give it more of a contrast. And then with the brightness and contrast, I'll just bring up the gain ever so slightly, so then we can see the difference here with the color. It just makes it pop a little bit more with the skin tones and the saturation. And this is another example here. We can see that there is quite a big difference with the way the colors look. I think this just looks a lot nicer. Okay, so one last node we will add here is the focus gamma, and you can find this inside of Reactor, which I will leave a link in the description if you don't already have Reactor installed. So to prep the clip for Miles, we're going to go over into the keyframes tab and zoom in to fit. And then sometimes it doesn't automatically highlight. The clip is right here. But if you have a lot of clips in your scene, just go ahead and click it and it will go ahead and highlight. So we want to click and drag to right around here where he's holding his bag. And then we're going to go ahead and hold last frame till that pulls all the way till the end. And all that does is just freeze frame the last clip for us, or the last frame, I should say. So going over into the beginning now with a transform here, I will zoom and fit to size somewhere around here. We can go back and forth and reference where. So then once we are happy with where things are, so using this transform, I'm going to place a keyframe here on the center and the size, and then going back to where it finishes zooming. So when it stops zooming, somewhere around here, we'll go back and we will place a keyframe down at that point. And we will do the same thing. So adding a transform, we'll do the same thing with the ID card here. And then now all we are going to do is go back and forth. If I just make this bigger and play around with the positioning, and I'm going to do the same thing with the card here until you get something that you are happy with. Then when we play this back, we have this, and we will go ahead and tweak them inside of the graph. So pulling up the graph here, again, selecting Control A and then F on the keyboard, hitting T pulls up these. We're going to be using the ease in and ease out controls to make quite a sharp bend like so. So then when we play back, we get that nice ease in animation, or ease out animation, I should say. And I'll make this tiny bit tighter so it really pushes out there. And then I'll do the same, or I'll keep these numbers in mind here, and then do the exact same for the card. And then all together we get that nice ease out animation. And you can go ahead and tweak things back and forth, really spend time and making things look smooth. I'm just showing you how to lay down the foundations, but you can go ahead and tweak everything else yourself. Okay, so then once you're happy with everything, you should get something that looks like this. Okay, so now we have set up the groundwork to go ahead and transition into our next part of this Fusion comp. Okay, so going back into our comp and going over into this first transform, we're going to move this over into the side, and then going back into our file, we will bring in him on the bus and go ahead and then pull this up and then merge this on top of our second clip. And then going ahead with the media in and media out, and we'll push that till it's all the way till the end. And then bring in a transform, blow this one up, and then have this set up like so. Going back in the edit page and having this clip disabled, we can then start to see when the movement starts. So I'd say around here. So putting down a marker, and I'll say around here, and then putting down a marker for that. And then the acceleration of it is around here, and then go back into our Fusion page, resetting the center here and pulling up our spline, adding a keyframe here, and then going round and adding a keyframe here, and then just sliding that across. Control A, F to flatten, and use these to change that. And then now going back, I will now add a background and merging that on top. And then with the merge, making sure this covers the whole screen, and then going back and transitioning it here, we will go and see where the actual transition takes place. So disabling this and seeing where the frame changes. So right around here, and we'll actually just move this over and then go back into our Fusion. So then we will now keyframe the merge. We'll have the blend mode here, and then going back a frame and getting rid of that. So then now going over into our brightness and contrast, we know that this is where the actual frame appears. So we're going to go ahead and darken that over, setting a keyframe here, and then I'll say somewhere around here, I'll set another keyframe and then put that brightness down, and going ahead and keyframing that to something like this. And then now we will have a brightness and contrast on here, and going over to where that stops, or where it appears, placing a keyframe on the gain, and then moving over to somewhere around here and going back and reducing that gain there, and then have our graph looking like this. And that is the very basic transition there. Okay, so we'll add in another transform, this time on top of our clip, and have this kind of zoom in and have it sort of ease into the zoom. So placing a keyframe on the size here and having that zoom in like so. So I'll select this now and actually move this along and then ease in the graph like so, making sure we get that straight line there. And everything together gives us this. There is one more thing I'll go ahead and add, which is a rotation here, and I'll have it slightly rotate to the side here, and we'll do the same thing with that. So selecting, going over into angle, and then bringing that down. I will go and now decrease the size ever so slightly and making sure that none of the black borders appear. And there is our basic transition. One last thing to polish off the animation here is to go ahead and overlap the two animations of it zooming out and swiping over. I have this one selected, the swipe over, and we can see here it ends at frame 30. If I go ahead now and select that first transform that we made, you can see here it ends at frame 31. So going over into the swipe, zooming out now, I will go ahead and just drag this across a fair bit and then have the animation be tighter. And that just ensures nice, clean animations. So then everything together, we get something that should look along the lines of this. Okay, going back into our edit page and then going over into our effects building timeline, we're going to go into our file again. We're going to go ahead and bring in either one of these over here, and we're going to go ahead and cut these out. So like I said before, right clicking, going over into change and clip speed and hitting freeze frame, and then just extending this over. We'll go over into the Fusion tab. And then like I said before, using B-spline or magic mask, go ahead and mask out the letters. If you don't have magic mask, you can go ahead and use B-spline. Now that we have these cut out, I went ahead and just duplicated them and I cut the other part out. So then now we are compound clipping these and going ahead and adding them into our scene. Using this as reference, of course, we can see that the Morales is here and then the Miles is up here. So we're going to go and just add that in. So going over into this layer and adding them in and getting a transform and just fitting that like so. And I'll go ahead and put the brightness and contrast here. Okay, so now once that's done, we can go ahead now and design the stickers that pop up on the screen. Okay, so I'm going to do this in my effects building timeline. I will go ahead and grab in a Fusion comp and we'll make that inside of the Fusion comp. So using this as reference, I'm just going to paste in the text that I originally had and then changing this over into black, going into shading and changing this to black as well. Then adding a background here with this hex code. We'll then go and plan out the shape here, increasing the border width somewhere like here will do, and then increasing corner radius to all the way. Then pulling this down, copying this and bringing in another background and pasting in that. This time we're going to go ahead and deselect solid and increase that border width, and then go ahead and decrease the size like so. And then we're going to play around with the border width till we get something that we are happy with. And I think for now that looks good to me. So now we're just going to copy this rectangle and then paste it over. But now we're going to bring this all the way together so it makes a circle and then just move that along like so. Okay, so adding in another background and then adding in now a rectangle. We'll leave it as that, uncheck the solid and increase the border width. Then we're going to go over into length and decrease the size of that. And then if I just go ahead and only view this, I'm going to decrease it to somewhere like that will do, and then play around with the positioning so that it's just in the corner there. And then we're going to go ahead and make a transform and leave it as there for now. So now I'm going to go ahead and change our pivot point to be in the center there, and then just rotating it over on an angle. And then if I hit Control G to pull up the guide, I'm going to bring this over like so. We can see that it doesn't quite match. So we'll go ahead now and decrease the length and increase the position. Something like that will do. So then now with this selected, going in and adding a rectangle, and we're going to make the line that connects them, making sure to keep the same thickness of the lines, and something like that should be good. So then I'm going back into the edit page and just going ahead and compound clipping that, then going back into our main timeline and adding that into our clip. So then going back and forth and disabling the Fusion comp, go ahead and just add things where you think they should be. We're going to go back into our folder here and go into the Roto tab and pull in the arrow here. And all we're going to do now is just another freeze frame. I'll duplicate, right click, change clip speed, freeze frame, and then delete that excess, zoom in all the way, and then just pull out that arrow there. And we'll go ahead now and compound clip that. So going over into our main timeline, going over back into effects, and then pulling in that compound. So then merging this on top of the card, and we can see the animation starts at the very beginning. We want the animation to start right around here. So we will pull this back until that appears, and then adding in a transform, scaling that up and flipping that over. So then when we play, that animation then kind of guides us over into the next clip. And whilst we're here as well, I'm going to go ahead now and pipe this into a background and changing the color to the same color we have here. And to make it more cohesive as well, I can also go in and add a shadow. So adding in a shadow there, pulling the shadow down, and then pulling up to the graffiti here on the side, I will go ahead and pull the color from that, like so. Just realized it's also flipped around the other way. So I'll go ahead now and just tweak that as well and have things set up like so. So back in our effects timeline here, we're going to go ahead and open this in another timeline and just copy this Fusion comp and bring it out into our effects timeline, because then we're going to go ahead and switch things around in order to transition into the next scene, right? So going over into your Fusion tab, we are going to disconnect, add in a transform to this and flip this around, and then just go ahead and move this over like so. And then going back, we can go ahead now and compound clip this. And going ahead and adding it over here in the comp. Now there's one last thing I did to go ahead and make these stand out a little bit more. Is I went in and I added a shadow underneath them. The same thing I did for here, but I just kept it as black. So just have one here, copy that, paste that over so that we can tell the difference. And I won't have the shadows in the exact same place. I'll have them in different places as well, like so. And then I'll also go ahead and do the same for this one as well, but I'll just bring that down and across ever so slightly. Okay, so quickly scrubbing through the clip here, we can see that with our background, because there's no media in for it to pipe into, because it doesn't start here, the background just goes its to original form. So with the merge, we're going to go ahead and see where it pops in, so where it disappears. So here, keyframe that, going back one, keyframing that, and bring the blend all the way down. So then now I'm bringing up the transform we made. We'll bring in another transform and we will now animate it swiping over to the right, and we'll have that as an ease out like so. And then with this as well, we will also follow that animation path. I'll have this a little bit earlier instead, and then over like so, keeping it in the center there. And we will go ahead and do the same. So it goes over and follows that animation path there. So now that we're happy with that, we can go ahead now and keyframe the camera shake that they have on, as well as them appearing. Okay, so going ahead now and typing in camera shake and adding that in. We're going to go to the X and Y and bring that all the way down. Then bring down the rotation by quite a bit as well. I'm going to bring up the randomness, bring down the overall strength, and then bring down the speed as well. I'll also change the setting like so. And then viewing it, we get this sort of stop motion animation kind of look. So now go ahead and copy and paste that into all of them and just change around some of the settings and the randomness as well as like the speed as well. Just going ahead and tweaking them slightly. And then lastly, doing it for this one as well. And when you do that all together, hopefully they all look sort of randomized. And then going back, you can match where things go ahead and appear by going back and forth there and keyframing the blend mode or the opacity on the merge nodes. Also realizing I made a mistake earlier as well with putting the brightness in front. I just went ahead and brought them back. And then once that is done and you've gone around and keyframe things, we could then go back into our brightness and contrast here and keyframe the gain here at the end and just place that down. And we'll go ahead now and animate that as well. So holding Control and selecting will allow us just to target one of them. If you just go ahead and move this without holding Control, it moves both of them, which we do not want. So we can go ahead now and target that. And I'll bring this down a little bit. Now I can now see that the graffiti tags as well also. So we'll just go ahead now and hold the last frame there and do the same for this one. And that should be good. Okay, so the only thing left now to keyframe is the blur, that defocus gamma, as well as the text here that appears, which is just a description I got online. So I went and added the animation onto the text by just keyframing the start in and the start end. And that is just a write-on animation. And I went ahead and just positioned it here. And when we go ahead and blur all the layers together, the text will also be blurred as well. So copying this here and then changing its anchor so it's facing this way, we will now bring this to the top and I will merge that there. So bringing this over and increasing the size by quite a bit. I'll go ahead and use a transform here and just move this over. And then I can go ahead and add a defocus. And because it clips the edge here, I'll just bring this up and over. So I typically use this middle one here, and I'll also copy and paste it over to the bottom like so. So we'll have the blur be less strong and then go ahead and place a keyframe to where we want it to be null, and then going ahead and dragging that over. Sometimes with the defocus gamma, it doesn't let you drag over, so you have to go ahead and find the name and then just hit the defocus size here and then flatten, and we will match the same motion as we did before here. And then when this transitions over here, we'll go ahead and remove that like so. Okay, now we can go ahead and go back into the edit page. Okay, so now I'm going to go all the way to the beginning here and just add some impact frames to finish off this half of the edit. Duplicating this over here into this frame and changing this over into black. And then disabling all of this here, and we're going to go ahead and actually copy this over and bringing this forward until the color changes here. We're going to go ahead and bring in an adjustment clip and break that off, select these again and go back into this adjustment clip here. We're going to select this and type in invert color, and then we'll pull in a color corrector and then change this over into pink like so. Okay, pulling then these up, we're going to go ahead and add in another adjustment clip, and this is where we're going to make the shake that we are going to use for the majority of this edit. Okay, so looking back now, I've just realized that I actually haven't added a shadow onto this. So going over into our compound clip or our adjustment clip here, then hitting shift space and typing in shadow and adding that in, we're going to connect this over and just pull this across and decrease the alpha, then merge this like so. Then we're going to go ahead and grab the input here and connect it over into the mask. So then when we move along, you can see that it only appears here inside of that asset we made earlier. All right, moving back up into this one now, and I'm going to go ahead and open that, and we're going to make the shake. So shift space, type in camera shake and select the one without the extra letters and add that in. And we're going to be making the shake with anim curves. So going over into the motion here, right clicking and going over into modify with, and then anim curves. And then the modifiers tab will open up. So click the modifiers tab. We're going to go over into source and change that to duration. Then curve, we're going to make that custom. Now selecting this or hovering over this noun, we're going to take away the 1 here and replace that with a 0. And then hovering over this corner here, we're going to add a 1 like so. And then we're going to make this an ease out. So holding Control A to select all and then just dragging this down, we can make our ease out curve. And basically all this is saying is as the timeline of this goes on, the motion scale decreases all the way till it's 0. And if I go ahead and just increase the speed scale here and go back into the edit page and wait for this to cache, you will see the results. So just playing now, you can see that we have like a dramatic shake at the beginning and then it closes off. And what's good about this is if I go ahead and just copy and paste this and I change it around, it also then adapts to the length of the clip. And I can also then have a shake onto here as well. So going back into this, we're going to go ahead now and change these settings. So this we can go ahead and change over into 0.252. And then going over here, we'll change this to 0.197. Then changing that over into 0.030. Then changing this over into 0.693. And then we're also going to increase the phase to quite a bit and then changing this over like so. And these are the settings I usually use. One last thing, I usually go ahead and change that to reflect and I decrease that zoom in there. And everything together is the shake that I typically use. Okay, so going into this adjustment clip here, we're going to go and add in a flash. And I usually do that just with a brightness contrast, just a nice little simple one. And I do that by increasing the gain. So second keyframe here and going all the way into keyframe 7, setting a keyframe there and increasing the gain ever so slightly. Then just bringing that and having it a really sharp angle. And then going over into this adjustment clip here, I'll decrease the gain. So having this over at frame 22, keyframe at the gain here and then over at 28. And then just putting that down and then also having that like so. And I'll actually go ahead now and make this come in sooner. And then going back with this adjustment clip here and bringing this over, I'll make this 1 frame and change the color to somewhere around there. And then I'll also bring in one of these and change this over into white. Okay, so we're almost at the end with this scene here, which is like the last Mograph scene. So pulling in a fusion clip and dragging this along like so. Okay, so now I'm going over into our effect building timeline, locating the card here and right clicking and opening this inside of the timeline. And then we're going to copy this over, going back into the effects building timeline and pasting this somewhere around here. And we're going to change this over so it is for Gwen. Going over into Fusion now, opening up our files and going over into Gwen and then grabbing this over and replacing it with the Miles clip and then just resizing this like so. Then just go ahead and change her info. Okay, so once we have things changed over, we can go ahead and compound clip that and head over into the main timeline and enabling this. So going back into the file and pulling in the Gwen 2 here, as well as this one as well. Now, lining these up is quite literally just the rotoed out version of her. And playing through this now, I have realized that there is a render glitch, but it is pretty simple to fix. So having these lined up like so, and I just went ahead and moved this over so you can go ahead and see. Going 2 frames forward, go ahead and make a cut there, and then go another 2 frames forward, and then make a cut there, and then make a cut here in one of them, and just delete this frame and then line them back. So then when we play, they are all on the same frame, and then just reset the position of these like so. And then just going over here and trimming this. And then I'll go ahead and compound clip this and compound clip this one as well. Going back into the main timeline here, selecting this, and then now bringing in our assets. Going back into our effects timeline, pulling in again, and we're going to go over and bring in this clip as well as this one over here. This is already freeze framed for us. So all we have to do now is go inside of the Fusion page with the B-spline and just mask out this section here. So something along these lines will do just fine. Okay, going ahead now and selecting this, adding in a transform here and blowing this up. We're going to go ahead now, and then firstly, I actually should have probably added in that background, and then Control C to copy and Control Shift V to paste an instance, and then paste that in like so. So then if I go ahead and just add in a transform like so, you can see that there has been added in. Okay, so we're going to go now and color correct these like we did in the first one, just to make it pop. Selecting this, typing Shift space, and I'm going to get up the hue curves. Then we'll add in color curves, and lastly, brightness and contrast. This one I had my hue set up like so, and we'll see the difference in this one over here. And then going over into the color corrector here, I'm just going to bring that down like so. And then also in the brightness, I will bring up the contrast. And then with the brightness and contrast, I'll bring the contrast up to minus or 0.17. And then I'll clip these like so. And then I'll go ahead and copy this over. So then we should be left with something along the lines of this. Okay, so going in now and bringing in this clip, and we will paste or put this inside somewhere like here. We'll add in a transform to scale that up. So going ahead now and viewing this, and we'll get a rectangle to mask out the black lines. And then I'll paste another one in and set this as subtract and bring up the soft edge. And let's view that. Okay, so if I go ahead and add a camera, or a transform, sorry, and just move this along like so, bringing in that compound clip we also made earlier, and then pasting that in here and moving that along. And we will also add the same brightness and contrast to that as well. We will add the defocused before here, and then just increase that size and change it to this one like so. And we will play around with the sizing and stuff later on. So pulling in the ID card we made earlier, and we'll go ahead and go with that same process of adding in a image plane and then a renderer and just pulling that in. So going over into the beginning and moving our camera along, we will zoom it in like so and go back and forth and sort of match up the shots as close as you can. So now you're happy with how things look. We go ahead and we do the exact same rotation, but starting out from here this time. Keyframe this over and then somewhere around here, and then have that same animation. And then with the transform, we will do the same thing as we did before. So having this start off here, so we get something that looks like that. So then over here, I will place a keyframe on the center and the size, and then going over into the timeline here and seeing where it stops. So somewhere around here will do. Then placing a keyframe on the size and center, move these up like so. Move this down a bit. And then here we can go ahead and adjust the size of things. So for one, I will bring this up like so. So now we can go ahead and change the graph. Again, hitting F to flatten out and then bringing T. We're just going to go ahead and smooth this out. And I'm going to select all of this and just edit this like so. And I think that looks good so far. Going ahead now and adding another transform here over into the ID card, we will follow the same animation keyframes. So here at 3, I'll put one, and then going over to frame 30, I'll put the other. And then before I forget, I will flip these around and then change the sizing and place that somewhere there. And then going ahead and keeping these numbers in mind, I will copy and paste the same. So going over, selecting all, and then F, And then this one was 49. And this one was 76, like so. And then I'll go ahead and add in another transform. And before this one ends, I'll put a keyframe here, then going back again, disabling and seeing where that ends. So all the way to the end of the clip, and then move this along. We can see that our clips disappear. So again, going over into the hold last frame and keeping those there. And I'll do the same for this one as well. And here is where I can go and tweak things around. Again, here we can go back and forth and check whether we're happy with this. I'll go ahead and just tweak this around a tiny bit. And I'll also bring this forward and blur this. So then once we're happy with that, we can go ahead and animate this like so, making sure to go back and forth and seeing what you are happy with. Now, and over here, we can see that it doesn't quite line up. We want the hand to be moving quicker. So if we go ahead and open that keyframes tab, hitting zoom to fit, and then selecting our clip here and scrolling down until we find it over here, we can go ahead now and just drag that across till it starts moving. So we want it to be like it's following the camera there. And then whilst we're here, I will also increase the hold last frame as well. Okay, so once you've played this back and you're happy with the way things look, we can go ahead and compound clip this. I'm just going to go ahead and drag this and just disable this here and compound clip this. So then we can go ahead and make the freeze frame that we're going to use for this next scene. So again, on the last frame, clicking, changing speed and hitting in a freeze frame there, deleting this excess, zooming in and stretching this to fit, making sure that's all the way at the end. So we're going to do this inside of this compound clip. Okay, so going ahead and adding in a background, then adding in a rectangle like so, kind of angling this, something like that will do. I'll also actually add a little bit more onto this as well. Okay, so I went and added the letters 43 into the scene twice, and then I'm going to go ahead now and just pipe that into the mask input. Then I went ahead and added this short text here onto the bottom with these settings like so. So going back into the edit page on the effects timeline, pulling up the file here and going over into the miles folder, and then bringing in the one that says hey. And this is where we are going to make the Polaroid fold. Now, I already have a tutorial on this, but I will go over it again. If I just go inside the Fusion page, I go ahead now and shape this and just decrease the alpha. So having things set out like so with the rectangle here, I'm going to go ahead and select this and bring in an image planer. Go ahead and merge that and then add in a renderer. I'll merge this renderer in, hitting shift space and adding in a transform, and I'll copy and paste that transform over, hitting shift space again and then typing in bender like so. Now I'm going ahead and viewing the merge over in this transform, going over to my settings here and typing in 47.6 and then copying this over and pasting it here and adding a minus. Then we're going to go over into the bend. We're going to change the x-axis, change this to 90 and then pull the center all the way. And then when we go ahead and increase the amount like so and decrease the range, we control the bend. If I go ahead and change this to 3 and have that like so, you can go ahead and play around with this. To go ahead and add this and make this side pink, I forgot to go ahead and mention that these transforms are the ones used to actually control the angle of the bend. And instead of going ahead and just putting in your values here and then going ahead and inverting them, if we delete this and then go ahead and copy this and then Control Shift V to paste an instance, and then selecting your instance here, going over into invert transform, right clicking that and then click the instance and then hit invert transform and then just add that back. So then when we go ahead and move the Z value here, you can see it controls the Polaroid fold. I'm going to go ahead and pull in this image plane, copy and paste that, add this over, making sure that's still connected, then adding in a background and connecting this over into the merge. We're going to go ahead and select the image planer here, going over into visibility and just clicking the front here. Then to get rid of these weird lines here, we're going to go ahead and increase the subdivision to something like increasing the subdivisions like so, and then going over into transform into the translation and increasing this ever so slightly. So then now we can go ahead and change this over into pink. Going ahead and adding in another transform and just zooming in all the way like so. So then we can go ahead and compound clip this and bring this over. So going ahead and adding this into our scene and angling it the way we want, something like here, which is what I recall. And then going ahead now and adding a shadow and then just decreasing the alpha. Also making sure this doesn't disappear at the end here. Like we did before, just increase the hold last frame like so. Okay, going back into the file and going over into the Gwen file and pulling over this one, going over here and putting in the transform and just scaling this up. We're going to go over to where her hand reaches the screen and we're going to put down the opacity so we can kind of see what's going on. And we want this spot to be where it transitions. So we're going to go ahead and cut that and move that to the end of the clip. So then when we go ahead and disable this, we can see that it is virtually the same. All right, pushing this all the way forward, setting the opacity for this. We're going to go ahead now and go to where her hand appears, so here, and then delete this excess. We're now going to go ahead and compound clip this and cutting these sections up. So each frame, going ahead and just cutting that, and then going over into frame 1, pulling up the B-spline here, and just going around and rotating her hand. You go ahead and do this. If you don't have Magic Mask, go ahead and do it with Magic Mask. Okay, so once you've gone ahead and you've masked everything out, you should get something like this. I'm now going to go ahead and select a few of these frames and compound clip these as we're going to go ahead and add blurs to them. So adding a defocus gamma blur, which is a blur I always use, and increasing the blur size like so. So then when it switches over here, I'm going to add in an adjustment clip and then go over into the adjustment clip and blurring the background with a defocus like so, which then transitions into the next scene quite nicely. So when we go ahead and we deselect this clip, we can see that it is longer than it needs to. So we're actually going to go ahead and retime. Looking back here, we can see that her pose is over here. And then when we go ahead and enable it, it's all the way over here. So we just need to do a little bit of retiming. So we're going over here where it's black. So going over here when she's about to leap off, somewhere around here will do. We'll go ahead and cut that and we're gonna compound it like so. And then pull in a fusion composition, disable both of them so I can see where the clip ends. Somewhere here will do. And then cutting this over and enabling this and pulling this inside. I'm gonna add in our clip here, selecting our clip here and typing in time stretcher, adding that in. Depending on the frame you've added it in, it'll automatically go over into frame 0 and keyframe that. So let's go back to frame 0, keyframe that, and then going over into the end and going into our media here, we can see that there are 22 frames in here. So we're going to go ahead and hit 22, which brings us here. And then we're just going to go ahead and hit nearest. I'm actually going to go back 1 frame instead here. I think that's much better. Okay, going into the Miles folder and grabbing the clip here that transitions next to, viewing where it goes ahead and stops, which is right at the flash here. I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same and bring in a fusion comp and just cut off the excess there. And then whilst we're here, I'm going to go ahead and stop the clip here and just cut off the excess. So like before, it is not exactly the same length. So we're going to go ahead and compound clip this and then delete that, go over into our fusion comp and then add that compound clip. We're going to do the same, typing in and adding the time stretcher, but this time we're also going to add something called optical flow, and we'll go ahead and just disable that for now. So going back into our time stretcher here, going and placing a keyframe on 0. And then at the end, we'll go back and see how many frames are in our media. So 20, and then adding that over. As you can see, there's some weird ghosting going on. So we're going to get rid of that by going over into time stretcher and just retiming it like so. we'll have this cached into the edit page here. We can see that happening. So then now we can go ahead and add in a transform and just zoom in all the way. So looking back now, I'm not quite happy with this. So instead of going ahead and doing this now, I'll set this over like so, and I'll go frame by frame and just clean up this animation here. Okay, now in the edit page, we can go ahead and bring in one of those one framers here and add this before and make this white. Then pulling in an adjustment clip here, dragging this over to somewhere around here. I'll cut this off and then go in and add in a brightness contrast and have the exposure or the contrast, and then have the gain set up like so all the way to the end and just bringing that down to normal. So grabbing in a fusion clip like so and cutting it to the size of the clip, we can go ahead and drag in the clip of Gwen falling here and then doing the exact same thing that we did in the previous clips. So now that we have this in our timeline, I'm going to go ahead and delete that and go over into the fusion comp. Going over and grabbing that clip, making sure that at the beginning, shift space, typing in optical flow, shift space again, and then typing in time stretcher and adding that in, disabling the optical flow here. And I'm going to start this out at frame 4.1. And then over here, we're going to see how many frames there was, 16, and end that at 16. Going over into the graph here, I'm going to have this set out something along the lines of that. Then when we go over into flow and activate the optical flow, we get that nice flow here. All right, so we can go ahead and add in a transform and zoom in all the way. And then going over into somewhere around here, we'll go ahead and place a keyframe on the center and at the end there and have that then swipe over. And I'll make this an ease out instead. Going into our clip here and then grabbing the one that says swipe, and we will go ahead here and just increase the size of this as well as increasing our timeline here and going ahead and dragging this over so it just fades out ever so slightly. Going back into our clip, into the folder with Gwen and Miles, we'll have this clip which transitions in nicely. And then one more time, we'll go into the Miles folder and bring these over, and I'll just go ahead and make this smaller. Bringing in a fusion comp and just clipping it at the end here, and then getting rid of these two clips. Going over into our fusion comp and grabbing these two here, merging them on top of each other. I'll use the graph to guide us, and then I'll also go ahead and pull in a mask and use that to mask like so. So then I'll add a transform onto each of these and just pull them so it fits the screen like so. And then yeah, that is our final fusion comp. So one last thing I'll actually go ahead and do is I forgot to add these lines here that show him like shouting with the words coming out. So I'll just go ahead and do that now, and then we can call it a day. So just disabling this here and go ahead and see where it starts and put a marker down and see where that ends as well. And then put a marker down. We'll do this inside of a fusion comp and then go inside. So the way we're actually going to go ahead and make this is by adding in a background, changing the color accordingly, and then having in polygon nodes, making sure the diamond is unchecked at the beginning and adding that in. And we're going to go ahead and just make these action lines here a bunch of times. Okay, so going ahead now and having them drawn out. I went ahead and just animated them, opening up the diamond here and then going over into the end and having that animated like so. So then going over and typing in stop motion and adding that in, changing that over into 2. We have this. And then if we go ahead and do the same for the words here, so having the words typed out and just animating that and merging this on top like so, we are left with this animation. Then we can go ahead and enable and then shape inside with our translation here and just have this over into the side. So then when we play, we get that nice animation. Yeah, and that's it.